Hi, friends. I am back in the virtual room with Qasim Khan. So lovely to meet you.
Nice to meet you too. Thanks for having me.
I'm really excited to speak with you. I know you've been doing the rounds lately in Toronto here for those of you who are tuning in or watching. You have been busy in the theater scene for this past year. Currently, you're in the production of Germany Hyde Park's Hamlet. But before we get to that exciting opportunity, I kind of want to let folks know what your background is. I know you've had different interests over the years in terms of what you want to do in the arts. So how did that start? How did it start in terms of your interest in the arts and now you're on stage?
That's a great question. How did I start? I started when I was in high school and elementary school. I was a singer, so I was in choir. When I was in elementary school and high school, I was a singer, so I was in choirs, and that was sort of my first kind of step into the performing arts. And
Hmm.
um, and then as I got a bit older, I started doing musical theater uh,
Hmm.
at school and in community theater. I grew up in Newmarket, Ontario, and there was a
Right.
ton of community theaters in that area. Um, and then I sort of got bit by the performing bug, and I thought I would go to school for musical theater. I ended up getting into an acting program at the University of Toronto and Sheridan College,
Hmm.
and so started training as a classical actor. Uh,
Right.
and that's been my journey so far, is working mainly in classical theater.
Mainly classical theater. Yeah, that's how I know your work and your name. Do you ever miss the musical side of things?
I really do, and
And what
the
do
more
you do about that?
I'm talking to a couple of companies to see if there might be a hope in me programming a musical that would be a good fit for me.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, once your careers kind of look different than how you expect
True.
them to work. So I
Mhm.
kind of thought that I would end up in musical theater. Never in my life did I think I'd be doing Shakespeare kind of for a living. And I certainly didn't think I'd be playing Hamlet at any point. But yeah, there's no. I'm realizing as I get older that there's no kind of rhyme or reason to the way one's career goes. You kind of just flow with whatever's happening, and
Mhm.
so that's been my experience so far.
That's interesting, right? Because I think a lot of us who are not, I'm not an English native speaker, but we come to Shakespeare in different ways, and sometimes things resonate with us, and other times we're resistant to Shakespeare.
Yeah, yeah.
Some of my friends still resistant to it. So,
Okay.
what was that relationship of like encountering Shakespeare for you over the years, and then now being able to sort of perform and live those words?
My first experience with Shakespeare came in English class. So, in Ontario, a
Mhm.
lot of high schools will look at Shakespeare as a piece of literature. And so, in English classes, we were studying like Romeo and Juliet and Macbeth and Hamlet,
Mhm.
um, and like A Midsummer Night's Dream, these kind of like friendly introduction to
Right.
Shakespeare. Um, so that was my first kind of experience with Shakespeare, and I didn't really understand the words. I didn't really understand the poetry behind it. I knew that people thought Shakespeare was very, very important. And then as I started sort of creating my practice as an actor, Shakespeare became more part and parcel of it. So at theater school, we spent a lot of time with classical texts, including
Sure.
Shakespeare, to learn how to dissect the poetry and how to bring it to life off the page. And so and then I did some stage. I trained at a place called the Soul Pepper Academy, which is
Yeah.
a Soul Pepper Theater is a theater in Toronto. The academy, in that program, we did 12th Night, that was directed by Joe Ziegler and Nancy Palk, and so Shakespeare was part of the training experience of that.
Mhm.
And then after my time at Soul Pepper, I ended up doing a fellowship at Shakespeare's Globe Theatre in London, England.
Nice.
So I got to spend kind of a month and a half really focusing in on Shakespeare in the venue that the plays were written for.
Right.
So, and then at some point you kind of can't get away from it. If you're pursuing a life in theater,
Yes.
Shakespeare's going to be part of it at some
Right.
point. Um,
Hmm.
and I lucked out, I've had a 5-year career at the Stratford Festival and a lot
Hmm.
of Shakespeare there, obviously. So
Hmm.
now it's just part of the kind of toolkit that I bring along with me to everything. Yeah.
For sure. What was that experience like being in London for that opportunity in terms of what did you get to play roles that maybe you weren't playing? I think I read some interviews that you've done where maybe you got opportunities there that you were not getting here. Can you
Yeah.
talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. So in London, um, At the Globe, so the Globe Fellowship program was this opportunity that they had every kind of 2 years, where they
Mhm.
were about 20 some odd actors from around the world all together into the Globe Theater, and we would train with their coaches and with their directors and on the Globe stage, and that was kind of the big treat of that experience. My experience there was perfect because I was leaving this experience at Soul Pepper where I wasn't really getting to do much. I think at that time it
Mhm.
was rare to see a person of color leading a show
Right.
or playing significant roles in the kind of stuff that that company was doing. And
Mhm.
so I kind of left that training experience not having been able to practice anything I learned.
Mhm.
So I sought out this opportunity at the Globe because I thought it would be good to just be in a different country with new people,
Mhm.
different plays. And their approach was very different. They were laughing at me and another Canadian that was there because we were we were both people of color, and we were both so nervous about playing these lead roles in the scenes that we were doing.
Mhm.
Why would you be nervous? And we were explaining that in Canada, this is not the
Mhm.
kind of stuff that people like us get to do often. Uh,
Right.
and they were like, no, like you're a young 20-something-year-old guy. You should be playing Romeo. You should be
Mhm.
playing
Mhm.
stuff. So I got to touch these plays and characters that I wouldn't have gotten to in Canada. So I
Mhm.
got to play Romeo in a scene from Romeo and Juliet, Malvolio in a scene from Twelfth Night, and Henry V in Henry V.
Mhm.
So it was incredible because they were just more used to having people of color populating their stages in a way that we weren't at the time in Canada.
That's
It's
right.
changed a lot now in Canada, obviously,
Mhm.
which is great. But yeah, so at the time it was the perfect kind of step forward after my time at Soul Pepper.
Which makes sense because I would assume, yeah, you mentioned it was a few years back. So I would say, yeah, I think it's expanded a lot here in especially in Toronto or bigger cities here across Canada. But I think there's always room for growth
Absolutely, yeah.
in the arts. So so you've been in a Hamlet production, but this is the first time in Dreaming High Park that you played Hamlet himself.
That's right. So I did Dream in High Park back in 2016.
Mhm.
And at that time, they were doing two shows at once. So I was in All's Well That Ends Well,
Oh,
and I played a
yes.
character named Paroles, and then we did Hamlet as well, and I played Horatio, so Hamlet's kind of best friend.
Mhm.
Yeah, this summer is the first time I'm playing Hamlet, which has been really interesting and cool.
For sure. And I think I'm now speaking to you after, it's a few performances that you've had under your belt. So, in preparation for this time around, what have you discussed with your director and what are you bringing in personally to the role?
For sure. The adaptation that we're doing of Hamlet in the park this year, which is created by our director Jessica Carmichael,
Mhm.
is really focused in on Hamlet's grief and the grief of the people in Denmark. And so Hamlet is this young man whose father has died kind of mysteriously and very quickly. His mother has remarried very quickly. His uncle seems to be involved quite a bit, and he has a bad feeling about all of it.
Mhm.
The first 3 minutes, he's visited by the ghost of his dad, who kind of sets him on this mission to avenge his father's death. So the portion that we're focusing on this year, that's very different from what we did in 2016, is Hamlet's grief and how grief is not understood by the people around him.
Mhm.
People want to move on very quickly without asking questions. And as a result, Hamlet, given the big feelings he's experiencing and the big loss he's just experienced of his father, he's looking around at the kingdom and asking himself, who can he trust?
Right.
And what is everyone up to? What is everyone's agenda? So there's like political agenda, there's personal agenda. And so he's trying to make right his father's wrongful death in the face of these people that to him are acting erratic. So the portion of grief and loss and mourning, that's a facet of this production that's very different from the one I did in 2016 and one that I haven't seen in a production of Hamlet before too.
Right. And I think I think sometimes it's timely to discuss those big themes too, especially because I think it's also a condensed version of the
Yeah,
play. Um, and also I think we've lived a lot of heavy things in the last few years as a society, and I think grief is something that kind of goes with us and changes
I
over time.
I totally agree. I think this is kind of the perfect time for this kind of thing because you're right. There's a lot of grief that happened during the pandemic. There's a lot of loss that happened during the pandemic. And then last year, it sort of felt like we came back into the world without really bringing along all the learning we did over the two
Mm,
years of lockdowns with us. And I know that me and all my friends are looking at the world around being like, what is going, like everything is weird in Toronto.
mhm.
The city is torn up. The politics are unwieldy all around the world. There's
Right.
war. And we're looking at all this being like, what is this and who can we trust? And I think this play speaks to that as well. I
Mhm.
think there's a general kind of mourning that we're all experiencing, and to avoid it is one thing, but then to embrace it and see it depicted on stage, I think is powerful.
Yeah, I think so. I'm curious. I haven't come to the performance yet, so I'm kind of glad to speak to you beforehand. So I'm not informed by what I've seen. I kind of enjoy the previews first.
Right.
So so Hamlet is clearly grieving the loss of his father. And what is it about like, men and being vulnerable that sort of kind of maybe I don't know if you're bringing this into the role or things that you're thinking about while you're personifying this character.
I think that in in the first scene that Hamlet has, it's sort of after the big declaration where his uncle and his mother are announcing that they're married and that they're now the new king and queen, and Hamlet is very upset and very sad during this kind of reception. And his uncle turns to him at one point and says, the kind of the amount of sadness that Hamlet is showing to everyone is unmanly.
Mm,
And that sticks out to me. And I'm a queer guy, and so when we talk about masculinity and femininity, my ears perk up. I'm like, there's no
right.
reason for a
Uh-huh.
man to not have to mourn. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
so that I think the vulnerability comes from Hamlet being where he is and believing that he's in the right to feel the feelings he's
Mm-hmm.
feeling. Um, and I'm a vulnerable person. I think in my performing, I'm quite vulnerable. Uh, and so I'm for sure bringing that in. I also like, I have some personal connection to this story in a really uh, roundabout way. But my
Mm-hmm.
father died when I was 12,
Mm-hmm.
and from that point onwards, a lot of my family thought I was very sensitive and sad and
Mm-hmm.
quiet. Uh, so though and I know why I feel those things. It's because of the loss I've experienced.
Sure.
So I'm bringing that kind of vulnerability and sensitivity into the play, I hope. Um, but yeah, it's interesting. I was thinking about my family's Muslim and
Mm-hmm.
looking at kind of the grieving or mourning periods that are prescribed based on religion or culture.
Yes.
And so in Islam, a wife is allowed to mourn the loss of her husband for up to 90 days.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no prescribed rule for a man.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're a man, you can move on with your life within 24 hours. You can,
Right.
uh, if you're walking around the world being very sad, you're looked at as a problem
Mm-hmm.
because you're not functioning.
Right.
So I think what we're doing with this production is kind of looking at all these weird rules we have around grief and mourning, and kind of questioning them, being like, how can you measure a feeling? Um, and what are the rules between men and women? What are the rules? How are the rules different? And why are some people like men not allowed to be sad or grieve?
Right. Right. Yeah, and I think a lot of organized religions have those rules that, in some ways impede that processing from our men and our brothers and fathers and
Absolutely. And I look at my family, my bigger family, and I can see where to me I'm like, all of these problems that exist are because no one spent the time actually feeling the feelings they needed to feel.
hmm
Um,
hmm
and that happens in Hamlet, where people aren't experiencing the feelings that the loss of this king has done. They're moving on very quickly, and then terrible things happen.
Absolutely. And it's it's the same thing for all the other emotions. Just this is the one that we're focusing on in Hamlet. And I think I always, I didn't really read Hamlet growing up, so I came to it at a much older age, and it kind of makes more sense to me now as well in terms
Yeah,
of the language in it and all the different there's a lot of visual and poetry in in that play that I think I can understand it much better now as I kind of gone through also life stages, grief,
yeah,
loss of
yeah.
grandfather, parental figures. So I'm wondering what that language is to you now, because you're using it regularly now with this
Yeah,
performance. And if you've had discussions about it with your colleagues on stage, oh, and while you're rehearsing, I guess.
yeah, yeah. We've talked about the language quite a bit. We spend so much time of rehearsal. Anytime you're rehearsing a Shakespeare play, you spend a lot of time looking at the text and figuring out what things mean and what
Mm-hmm.
historically some words meant and how we can connect it to an audience today.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so we've spent a lot of time looking at the poetry of the text as well. The interesting thing about Hamlet to me, and I think this is why people are so fascinated by Hamlet around the world, is that the play is sort of set up to be this big revenge tragedy, and a revenge tragedy feels like the character at the center of it, so in this case Hamlet, should be taking action and always on the move, and that's what's thrilling about it.
Mm-hmm.
The text of Hamlet, though, is so philosophical. He's spending a lot of time thinking about his feelings and
Right.
talking about them out loud. And so, in the middle of this big, epic revenge tragedy, there's this guy who's sitting thinking, being like, why am I so sad? What
Mm-hmm.
is this feeling inside me? What is the point of living? So he's meditating a lot while he should be taking action, he feels.
Mm-hmm.
He comments on that during the play as well. But I think that's sort of the language of the play because it's so philosophical.
Right.
Really, it's very funny and really smart. Um, so it's quite psychological, and then trying to marry that with a really practical, action-driven thing. That's kind
Mm-hmm.
of, I think, the fascinating thing about a play like this. But yeah, we spent a lot of time talking about the poetry and the imagery, and doing it in High Park is also pretty cool because so much of the imagery and language is about nature.
Yes.
And so
Mm-hmm.
I can look up and see trees as I'm talking about trees, or I can see a bird flying over as I'm talking about a bird, and that's that doesn't happen all the time, and especially in an indoor theater, obviously. So
That's true. I was going to ask you about that and how you're using that setting to feel that performance. And what's it been like lately with the few days that you've been on?
it's been quite hot. It's been a hot, really hot pocket of time in
Yes.
Toronto. It's quite humid, and these are very sweaty performances right now. I really enjoy it. Um, so it's been kind of wet and hot. Um,
Hmm.
but the heat seems to be subsiding in the evening, which is perfect, and the rain has cooperated with us.
That's
So
true.
great. But I look out at the audience, and the theater is full every night, and people are sitting there through rainstorms, waiting for the rain to stop to see the show, and it's pretty. So it's been incredible so far.
I will say that I do notice that about Toronto audiences that they will stay and line up if they have to
Absolutely.
wait it
The other day was raining as I was getting to the theater, and people were wearing garbage bags,
out.
arms cut out as a poncho, so that they
Yes.
could stick it out in line to get a ticket. Uh,
Hmm.
Pretty special, yeah,
I'm
yeah.
so happy to hear that. I wanted to, I mean, I can go in different ways, but I don't obviously don't want to talk for hours. I wanted to ask if there's been a night of before or after the performance that has kind of stayed with you so far in this role, or maybe just each one is significant in its own way.
I think each one feels significant in its own way. It was hard. We've now been running for about 2 weeks.
Yes.
Around opening, I was so tired from rehearsal because we were rehearsing in the 40-degree weather as well.
Yes.
Uh,
Mm-hmm.
so we would have like a 5-hour rehearsal, a quick break, and then get ready to do a show during previews. So I was pretty tired. But then maybe 2 days after opening, there's this speech in Hamlet that starts with the words "Alas, poor Yorick," and it's the famous speech where he's holding a skull.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been so busy just learning the play that I hadn't really taken the time to enjoy the fact that I'm getting to play this really iconic character.
Yes.
There was a night when the audience was packed, and we do "Alas, poor Yorick," the skull monologue, right at the edge of the stage. And in that one performance, I was able to look up, and just kind of the way the light was hitting the top of everyone's head, I looked up and saw 1,000 people and me holding this skull.
Right.
Uh, and everyone was like, and there was people a couple of inches away from me too, but it felt like the reason anyone does theater is to connect with the people watching.
Mm-hmm.
And one moment to me, that stands out to me where I looked up and was able to acknowledge how cool of an experience this is and how important it is for people to see the play for themselves. It's a really famous play, and I think people get really excited hearing all these famous lines spoken out loud.
Sure.
There was this moment where we were all together. It was so quiet, um, and I was able to take in the magnitude of the experience, and that was
Hmm.
really cool. I think that's going to stick with me. But every show is different, and because it's outside, and because the audience is so different every night, every
Hmm.
show ends up being a little bit different.
Yeah, I
So
could see that. But I can see how that could be a really key moment, like that night.
oh
Also,
yeah,
it's great to have, like you said, someone who is not the non-stereotypical actor played this role, or what we've seen in traditional theater, someone who's, BIPOC and, from the queer community as well, like
yeah,
bringing all those experiences to the stage, but also being reflected back to us who are part of the
absolutely.
groups too.
My mom came to see the show on Sunday night,
Mm.
and she was, she's proud of everything I do, but she was most proud of this because she said that the audience near where she was sitting was full of Pakistani and Indian people who were so proud to see someone who looked like them doing this play.
Mhm.
And they
Mm.
were so excited. They were taking photos every couple of minutes. They waited around to say hi afterwards. Um, so that's pretty special. It's the audience that comes to Hyde Park somehow ends up being the most diverse audience I've ever experienced in a theater. It's not the normal theater going crowd in Toronto. And I think there's
Mhm.
something about it being outside,
Yes.
accessible, the tickets are very affordable. Um, it takes kind of the preciousness out of, or the stuffiness out of going to the theater for
Hmm.
so a lot of new people come. It's beautiful.
Yeah, I think you kind of nailed it for me because I think that's what it is about these open air shows where once summer is short for us
Yes,
sometimes,
yeah. So we have to,
depending on the weather we get. And
yeah,
two, I think it's like you said, you don't feel like it's out of the way because the venue is out of the way, or you could be at the park already and somebody tells you there's a play and
yeah,
you also kind of venture out and out of your regular routine, I think.
yeah, yeah.
Or people make it a special day out, right? So,
Someone was saying that, oh, my mom was saying this to me. She talked to some people that were sitting around her, and it was this older Indian couple, and the husband played Hamlet when he was in high school in India.
mm,
And so this was his birthday gift, was to come and see this Hamlet.
that's so
In,
special.
that's so special. Yeah.
Yeah, those are great. There's nothing like watching it in community, as I always say. I find that that's the one thing that I gravitate towards all the time, that you could be going solo to a show, but you're gonna be in community within like a
It's
few minutes.
incredible. I think that's why theater is so special, is it's kind of the one place we have left
Hmm.
where the strangers can come together. Everyone agrees to like turn off their phones and do the same thing, and it's beautiful. When 1,000 people's attention is on one thing, I think that's pretty special.
And I'm glad that you're having a good energy feedback too. Kasim, what are you doing after your performances? Like, how do you let Hamlet go to rest and you get your rest?
I get married. The walk. I've been walking home from High Park, so the walk is about an hour, and it allows me to. I walk with two of my friends who are in this show, Stephen
Mhm.
Jack Markoff, who plays Horatio, and Beck Lloyd, who plays Ophelia.
Nice.
And we'll walk home together and talk about the show for kind of maybe 20 minutes, and then
Mhm.
we make each other laugh. We tell jokes. The walk makes sure I'm really tired by the time I get home, so I'm
For
gonna go straight
sure.
to bed. We get to laugh a little bit and shake off the kind of the high stakes of the play,
Hmm.
and then we try to get a little bit of sleep so that we can wake up in the morning and do it again. Yeah,
Yeah. I always wonder how you kind of put aside, the characters you play.
it's some of them are easier to put aside than others. I'm finding with this, I'm just so tired by the end of the show.
Hmm.
Um, that it seems to not be a problem right now. My daytimes are a little bit more stressful. Like I wake up pretty tired from the show the night before. And so I'm trying to do normal things during the day, like working out and cooking and basic household tasks that need
For
to get
sure.
done. But they're also kind of, they help me meditate a little bit. That's helps me.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you making time to speak with us. I'm mindful of time, but to wrap up, what are we looking forward to for yourself after this is over? I'm sure you're gonna rest
I'm
once.
gonna rest a little bit, and then and right now I'm hunting for the next thing. So we'll see what shapes up for next year. but it looks like I'm going to have a little bit of rest this fall. I'll be able to do a bit of writing, which is something I also do on the side.
Oh, nice.
Probably catch up with my family. I've been busy this year, so I haven't seen
Mhm.
anyone all that much.
Of course.
Um, yeah, and then we'll see next year. I think I know I'm going to be back in the theater. I just have to see which one.
Makes sense. Absolutely. What feels right is going to come along.
Yeah, yeah.
If anyone wants to follow you, do you use any of the socials? What are
I
you?
do. Yeah, I'm on Instagram, and you can follow me at the Qasim Khan.
Oh, I love it. You have a very famous name too.
I do. Qasim?
Qasim. Yeah,
What have you
historical
heard of it?
figure.
Oh, yes, yeah.
I'm a nerd. I'll Google things.
Amazing. Yeah, yeah, yeah. You know,
I'm like,
I've been on a
this
mission
name
to
sounds
find what type of
familiar.
con. That's great. I'm trying to find what type of con I come from.
Right.
It seems like most cons, I'm probably a descendant of Genghis Khan. And
Oh,
I
wow.
don't know what that I have to I don't know how I feel about that. That doesn't seem very great.
Well,
Yeah.
last name is also from a European country that I don't really know anything about. So,
Okay, okay.
right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
I'm sure there's a history that I don't really know, and I'm not sure. One day
Yeah.
I'll get into that research.
Exactly. I think that's something I want to do in the fall is be like, where am I actually from? Yeah.
Good to hear. Qasim, thank you so much. So lovely to speak with you.
Thank you for having me. This has been really lovely. Nice to meet you.
Thank you.